We got a lot to discuss today. This is a very timely and I think very sensitive moment. But I think we ought to start right away and turn it over to you, Ari.
It's the right timing because we are in a sort of crossroad, because we had phase one of the war. We had a kind of pause with the hostages deal and the humanitarian pause, and now we are beginning the second stage of the war. So I think it's actually a good point to try to analyze what's happening. I hope it'll be okay that in the first few minutes, I do want to go back to basics. I'm sure that in the coming hour, we'll discuss what's happening, what's good, what's bad. We'll look into the strategy, the events. But I really think it's important to remember what this war is about. And I think that with the details, with the more information as days passes, sometimes people forget what the war is about. So here's my take. I really think that regarding the free world, mainly America, but the entire free world, on one dimension, this is a kind of second Ukraine war. This is a clash between the new axis, Russian, Iranian, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Chinese in the background, that is challenging the free world, challenging Pax Americana, and is trying to bring about a new reality, which can be very dangerous for all countries, nations, and people in the free world. In another dimension, for the free world, it's a kind of combination of a second 9/11 and a second ISIS. An eruption of barbaric terrorism which endangers all the rules of the game and all the world order, and is relevant to any decent person and definitely every freedom-loving person throughout the world. If God forbid, Hamas wins, that means Iran wins, that means Russia wins, and that means that radical forces that, as I said before, combine 11th century values with 21st century capabilities are going to endanger the entire free world. Regarding the Jewish people, this war, it is now clear, and this is why I'll say something I have not said in the past. There are two major assaults here. One is on the Jewish democratic state. It's not about settlements. It's not about occupation. It's not about any of that stuff, and we will deal with that stuff. The meaning of the Hamas attack, what the Hamas charter says, what the Hamas goals are about, what's Hamas's identity about, is to destroy the Jewish democratic state and to kill the Jewish people. What we've seen on October 7th is just the hors d'oeuvre. This is an attempt to slaughter all Jews and to frighten the ones who will remain, so we'll have to leave and run away. But sadly, what we've seen in the last month, especially in your country and other countries in the West, that now it's an assault on the Jewish people as well. Not only on the Jewish states, on Jewish Israelis and Israelis, but in a parallel way, which is, I find disturbing, troubling, and scary. There is an attempt to put the Jews back in time, to go back 80, 100 years back in time. So the two factors of this attack, the two arms of this attack, are actually combining in an attempt to end the Jewish golden era, which has begun in 1945, which has created Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel and created the perfect diaspora in North America and gave Jewish communities emancipation and pride and prosperity that have never been seen before throughout the world. So for the free world, it's crucial. For Israel, it's essential. but for all Jews throughout the world and all people who care about Jews, this is an existential war. Again, it's not about territory. It's not about a specific issue. It's not about some disputed piece of land. It's about the existence of the Jewish people and the ability of the free world to keep itself, its way of life, and its values. So to end this opening remarks, I think that for us, for you and us, and I think we are really one in this, the significance of this war, this horrible war, is, I'll say it in 3 or 4 words. We cannot take for granted what we took for granted. We cannot take for granted the success of the free world. We have to fight for it. We cannot take for granted the existence of Israel. We have to fight for it. And we cannot take for granted the liberation of the Jewish people throughout the world in the last, definitely post-World War era. We have to fight for it. And when we get into the specific issues, I think I ask you to bear this in mind. Because one of the things that trouble me is that we should have changed all our paradigms because of this war, understanding the historical significance of it. And what I see in the last month is that there is a failure to do it. I see the failure in Israel. I see a failure in the United States and Western public opinion. People rush back to their old comfort zones, and they don't address the amazing challenge facing us all. So in one sentence, my request, and we can discuss it or debate it, is please understand how significant it is for the free world, for Israel, and for the Jewish people. And please bear in mind that the significance is that a lot of beliefs, convictions we have are challenged because now we have to fight. We really all have to fight together for values, institutions, and nations that we thought are secured. On 2 months and a day after it had begun. The good news is, again, I said it before, is what didn't happen. We didn't yet have an eruption of a full-scale war with Hezbollah. We didn't have the collapse of the Arab-Israeli peace. We have an exceptional success with the Arab Israelis who proved to be so loyal and responsible. And in this sense, these 3 things are things that Hamas counted on that did not happen. And yet, within this good news, there are 2 troubling points. One is that the tension in the West Bank is growing, and there is a lot to blame on Jewish extremists. But there is more reason to be, it didn't erupt in a full way, but things are happening in the West Bank that are unacceptable morally and are dangerous strategically. And the second element, although we don't have a regional war, we have a kind of low intensity regional conflict. Right now, Iran, because they are afraid to use Hezbollah in a full scale way, they're using the Houthis in Yemen. And there are more and more, there is like things are simmering. So it didn't erupt, but there is more to be concerned about. Regarding the second piece of very good news is the hostages. I really think that the fact that we were able to release over 100 individuals, I think over 80 Israelis and about 20 non-Israelis, is an extraordinary achievement. And I think that it would have been difficult, a month ago, it would have been almost imaginary. It would have been difficult to see this coming. And here it's the result of 2 things, or 3 things. One, this is where the Israeli ground offensive worked. It put real pressure on Hamas, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. 2, you saw the amazing spirit of Israel, that we really, look, things are so tough, are so dangerous here. But you are in awe seeing the Israeli spirit, the Israeli solidarity, the warmth, the family-like feeling of this country is astonishing. And our willingness to pay a very high price in order to release these people, I'm not sure many other democracies would have taken this risk and would have gone so far in order to release them. And I think I give Israel as a whole a lot of credit. The third element, as usual, it's American leadership and diplomacy, which put pressure on Qatar. So it's the combination of the military operation, the Israeli spirit, and American diplomacy that actually gave us this remarkable achievement. But we must be honest and realistic. There is a price. There is a high price. Hamas is better equipped now. They probably had food shortage, which is gone now. They have more legitimacy. The kind of momentum of the war is in trouble. So although there was a consensus that we needed to do this, and I'm very proud of the fact that we did it, we have to be aware of the price. Now, the troubling news is, in my mind, is, as you understood from what I said in the beginning and what I'm about, I think it's the most just war ever. The most just war ever. There's no doubt in my mind. That doesn't mean that I'm happy with every step Israel is taking in this. And I think that one of the troubling things is that you feel, without getting right now into the moral issue, which we will discuss, that there is something a bit heavy and not very creative about the way the IDF is conducting the war. And the result is that 2 months into the war, we have achievements, but they are limited, relatively limited achievements with a very high price. And again, I'm sure we'll discuss it in detail, but that's kind of one reason for concern. The other, in my mind, which goes with this, is the lack of a political diplomatic initiative. I said it before, I wrote about it. I'm happy that some of my dear friends in America have written about it. I think it's essential to have a wartime peace initiative. It's essential for Israel, essential for America, and essential for the American-Israeli relationship. Not because I'm naive about the prospect of peace tomorrow, but we have to make it clear to ourselves, to our allies, and to our enemies that there is the goal that we fight this war as a democracy for democratic values with the pursuit of peace, even if it'll be difficult to achieve. The fact that the military operation is heavy and there is no Israeli political diplomatic initiative creates a problem. And if you ask about the operation in southern Gaza, it's very, very challenging because I don't believe that we have really to look for a sophisticated, brilliant way to defeat Hamas. We don't want so many people in Gaza to suffer so much, and we don't want just like it has to be much more decisive, much more focused, and much more effective. In order to do that, you need a political umbrella. So my concern now is that time will be running out, that patience, we will lose the ability at a certain point to conduct a war properly while we didn't have enough achievements. As I said, don't get me wrong. Hamas is evil. In my mind, it's a Nazi organization. It has to be crushed, but it has to be crushed with wisdom, with sophistication, with a real attempt to fight this war in the best way possible within tragic circumstances. There's one way to to win this war, and that's to see the tunnels, this horrible, demonic hell that Hamas has created 70 meters underground. You have to see that demolished. That will be the moment Israel will win the war. We have to get rid of the Hamas of Sinwar, who is an evil, evil, evil genius, and Mr. Mohammed Def, who is his military person. We have to see that leadership gone, and we have to see this structure that tries to neutralize all of the advantage of Israel as a fighting democracy. We have to see that destroyed. That will be the real meaning of a military victory before we go into the political solution. Now, sadly, so far, the Israeli achievements have been mostly on the ground, again, with a very high price. So the moral issue. First of all, I'm afraid sometimes I see many Israelis who are so traumatized by what happened, by the atrocities of October 7th, have even moderate Israelis sometimes lose their sensitivity and empathy to innocent Palestinians. I'm not talking about the evil Hamas people. Thank God this did not happen to me. I'm very tough regarding Hamas. I have a lot of empathy for the suffering of the people of Gaza. And I really think the goal of the war is to liberate both Israel and the Palestinian people from the evil rule of Hamas. They are threatening us, they're oppressing and destroying their own people. But when it comes and to the terrible numbers, when you see how many people are getting killed, I think there should be a kind of gold standard to how you judge it. And my gold standard is the way President Obama conducted the war against terror. During Obama's tenure, nearly 25,000, over 24,600 civilians were killed in different activities of America and its allies against terrorist organizations. In order to crush Al-Qaeda, to kill bin Laden, and then to fight ISIS later on, that was the toll America paid. Among other incidents, a wedding was attacked in Yemen in December of 2013. A hospital was attacked in Afghanistan in October of 2015. And another hospital was destroyed in Aleppo in December in 2016. Obviously, America did not want that to happen. America tried to conduct the war in the most moral way possible. And President Obama was specifically sensitive to that. But there was a realization in the Democratic administration of President Obama that when you fight evil forces, sometimes horrible things happen. And you cannot surrender to Al-Qaeda, you cannot surrender to ISIS, and you cannot surrender to Hamas. So I want my government and my army to do their best and to do more than even they do to save Palestinian lives. But I can tell you two things. The sensitivity in Israel, in the army, is so high to these casualties. There is no attempt, there is such an attempt to limit them. So what's happened is tragic. I want it limited, but I ask people with a sense of fairness to be fair and to compare this and to put it in perspective, as I said, regarding what happened during the Obama years. If Iran is the mother of all evil in the Middle East, Qatar is the father of all evil. And sometimes Qatar scares me even more than Iran because it plays a double game. They are so sophisticated. So the fact that you have a nation that it knows what it does when it supports Hamas. They funded it all. They knew their dollars are not going to give food for babies, but in order to build these tunnels and rockets and equip the terrorists with sophisticated weaponry. And somehow, because of the sophisticated strategy, which gave them so much influence in Wall Street and so much influence in American academia, demand from my so much influence in social networks. They are getting decent people in America, literally murder. My demand, in a way that no other nation would have done, to fight as a democracy, to win as a democracy, that would have done, and never lose its neshama. Of what they've done, never lose would have been. We have to be. Would have become a pariah, but keep our sensitivity and keep the standards. We can explain why, but let's not get in America and Europe and Qatar has got is not. So I think right now we have no other way but to try to get hostages out. We have to deal with that was never demanded. But the day after of America, I think other Western countries has fought such complicated, it's incomprehensible, dirty wars. That there is such a huge American naval. Our responsibility in a country supporting terror to keep the moral standards. They supported Taliban. And my request to non-Israelis is don't. On the one hand, they don't or the worst terrorists of the trap of this horrible. And on the other hand, they have all these fancy cocktail parties in Manhattan and Harvard. Is not willing to give. So we have to realize that the credit, Qatar, in my mind, is evil. Space that is dangerous. Any other and part of the new order of the Middle East after the war ends has to be to see that Qatar totally changes. I think we talked now for what 15, 20 minutes without saying Netanyahu. That's quite an achievement. So we'll change that in a few minutes. On the ground level, in real life, solidarity is amazing. Again, I described it to you before. I'm sure you're reading a lot about it. You know, Timna, my wife and myself, we went down to visit again the Kfar Aza where the atrocities happened, and you see so much amazing activity of supporting the victims, of supporting the hostage families, of supporting the people who lost their livelihood, the solidarity, and the army. The army has, again, the army is a people's army. I mean, most of the soldiers now are reservists. So the spirit of Israel, the solidarity of Israel is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I had, on a different visit, some friends who came from Manhattan went to visit there, and they were overwhelmed. I really think there is something rare and unique about this spirit and this solidarity. Having said that, I fear that as the war becomes a long war, it's not a short war, we cannot just count on that. And this brings me to what you asked about the cabinet. I said it before, I was very supportive of this war cabinet. I contributed my humble contribution to the formation of this war cabinet. And I think the war cabinet saved us from horrible things. When I talked about the things that didn't happen, the horrible scenarios that did materialize, a lot of it is because we had this semi-unity government, a kind of emergency government, which means that when having Gantz and Eisenkot as part of the war cabinet, one brings reason, moderation, experience, like meritocracy that you need in war. Two, it gives internal legitimacy, which the government would totally not have had. And three, it helps a bit with the fight for Israel's international legitimacy, which, as you know, is a difficult one. So I'm all for the war cabinet, and I'm very happy it's here. However, I think that what we see now, that it did not solve the problems of the Israeli state, of the dysfunctional Israeli government. And as time passes, we have to deal with these issues. We cannot only count on philanthropy, whether it's from New York or from Herzliya Pituah. We need to fix the state, which has proven to be dysfunctional. And so far, the politics of Israel do not allow that. The second thing is what I referred to. There is a difficulty to come with a political initiative, with my wartime peace initiative, when you have extreme right-wing people in the government. And therefore, I think, and this is like a fresh thought that I had in recent days, that we may come to the point where there are two options. One is to change, to actually have a change of leadership, which is probably very difficult to do. Or the other is widen this government and make it a real unity government and put pressure on Lapid and possibly Lieberman and others to join the government. If Lapid would be Israel's foreign minister and Lieberman will be finance minister, two of the fronts we face, civilian fronts, will be handled much better. And having an extreme right-wing government with just the addition of two leaders and then three other ministers may become, at a certain point, it won't be good enough. And we may be approaching this point, which leads us to Netanyahu. I still think that Netanyahu has no political future. And my two argument, one is historic and one is present day. The historical argument is that no Israeli prime minister survived the war. Golda Meir had to resign after the 73 war. Menachem Begin had to resign after the first Lebanon war. Ehud Barak lost the elections after the second Intifada just began. And Ehud Olmert had to resign after the second Lebanon war. So in my mind, it's almost political physics that with such a horrible war, with such a terrible failure in the way it began, I don't see Netanyahu surviving this politically. The present day argument is that Netanyahu's survival formula was based on the fact that people don't die, people are not unemployed, and people have a reasonably good life. That formula is gone. So I think that because of these two reasons, and you see the polls, I mean, in the polls, he had a slight rise now, but he has half the support, generally speaking, that Benny Gantz has. And he lost a lot of his core support. So now that does not mean that Mr. Netanyahu understands or agrees with me, okay? He has a tendency to believe in himself, in his importance, and sometimes he has a tendency to believe he's as important as the state, because he's, in his own vision, he's the savior of the country, and therefore anything that justifies his political survival serves the state. I find it difficult to believe that he will survive, but perhaps when we'll discuss the future later, I have major concerns. I'll say it in a sentence now. The day after the war is the most crucial make or break moment you can imagine, because you have a combination of all the failures of Israel in the last 20 years that were exposed. You have a national trauma that endangers the soul of the nation. And on the other hand, you have the amazing opportunity because of this solidarity and civilian society and the realization of so many good people that they must save the country. So there's an amazing crossroads where opportunity, a deep crisis really meets a great opportunity. So I think that when we end the conversation, I hope that we can talk about what is to be done there, because the future issue, I think, will not be Bibi or not Bibi, as it was for 20 or 30 years. The future issue will be whether we'll have extreme nationalism that is post-Netanyahu, or we'll have some cynical people who will take advantage of the situation and populists, because this is our era, or you will have what I hope, which is the emergence of a strong, serious, mature, centrist force that will really give remedy to a lot of what we've seen and really open a new page in Israeli history. I have to be a bit cautious there, but look, Bibi, for good reasons, gained endless suspicion. So all the time, people are suspicious of his motives, and by the way, that's the main problem, because again, he made terrible mistakes. He's still a very talented strategist. The problem is that there is a feeling, again, for good reasons, that his personal agenda is contaminating the decision-making process, not because of stupidity, but because of what I call the royalist syndrome, the Louis XIV, the État-moi syndrome. That's the main problem with Netanyahu. But I can tell you that as far as I know, and I think I know, I mean, there is tension regarding Netanyahu, especially with politics. And you have issues, what he does with funding ultra-Orthodox, like old politics. Today, there is an issue with the shooting. Now, we had an American problem now because they're trying to encourage people to have guns. And a person was almost executed by some extreme right-wing, so to speak, soldier while fighting a terrorist, and Bibi reacted in a shameful manner, and immediately guns attacked him. And now Bibi backpedaled. He realized he made a terrible mistake. So you have these kinds of tensions. As far as I know, in the war cabinet itself, the division is different, because I think that generally, without getting into things I cannot discuss, I think that General Eisenkot, who's Benny Gantz's lieutenant and partner, and Netanyahu are sometimes on the same page in being cautious, in not wanting to go into radical use of force. While Defense Minister Gallant is much more, if you like it, you can call him the adamant, tough guy. If you don't like it, you can say the narrow-minded military guy. So the tensions, as far as I know, in the cabinet are not necessarily Bibi versus anti-Bibi. It's the people who wants to use as much force as quickly as possible, and facing the people who realize that in asymmetric warfare, using a lot of force in an unfocused way is sometimes counterproductive. In my mind, the hero of this war is President Joe Biden. And I sometimes say it's not in spite of his age, it's probably because of his age. Because he has World War II at his background, he was very young then, and he has the Cold War. He is the kind of old-fashioned, tough Democrat that we've not seen. America has made so many mistakes in the Middle East in the last 30 years. And here, the American performance is extraordinary in being tough vis-a-vis the bad guys, but also demanding of Israel to be humane and democratic and to handle the war in a responsible manner. So I think Israel's mission number one is to help Joe Biden help Israel. And sadly, Israel makes it difficult for Joe Biden to help Israel. So I'm worried because I see what's happening in America before we get into the anti-Semitism part. And this is what I said in my opening remarks. I'm afraid, first of all, it's incomprehensible that Israel doesn't have a strong voice in America. For our first 30 years, we had Abba Eban. Then for about 20, 30 years, we had Netanyahu when he was effective. Then we had, all kinds of Israeli figures here and there. We had amazing Jewish leaders. I love and cherish Abe Foxman especially, but there were others. The fact that there is no Israeli voice, and I think there are some remarkable Jewish leaders, but this is so essential. It's so essential. And in this day and age, people have to see someone they can identify with. It's not enough. It's not technical. There should have been an Israeli figure who is now an American hero. And that didn't happen. And that's a major Israeli failure. Put that plus the fact that we did not, as I said, whatever happens, and I'm willing to talk about what I think should happen in Gaza at the end of the war, but we should have had an American-Israeli peace initiative by now, joint that defines what the war is about according to our shared values. So because this didn't happen, you have a growing rift because more and more moderate Democrats, I'm not talking about the extreme progressives, who understood it intuitively when they saw October 7th, are gradually drifting. And Joe Biden will find himself totally isolated. You know it better than me. And on the other hand, I'm a bit afraid of a state of mind. Look, one of my greatest fears is that the Hamas atrocities were not an accident. They wanted to drive us crazy. The beheading, the rape, the burning of families alive, it wasn't just barbarism on the spot. They wanted us to lose our rationality. And to a degree, there is some success there. Because we find it difficult to think in a cold-headed way. And therefore, there is a kind of thing, we must win, which is true. But you must win in a smart way. Ben-Gurion knew how to do it. He knew how to speak in the UN while being very tough in the battlefield. Today, we find a kind of Israeli approach, which is very hawkish and tough on the one hand, and doesn't know how to speak the language of the international community today. So I'm very worried, and I still go back to what I said, which is my admiration for America in general, for President Biden specifically, and the fact that I think that all lovers of Israel and lovers of America and freedom should try help this relationship, which is it's functioning right now, but it's not. It should get much more support because that's the key to success in this war. Then we go into anti-Semitism. So, look, I think that I care about. Well, I try to care about all human beings, but I definitely worried about Jews in the world. Sometimes I find myself worried about people who don't live in Israel as much as I worry about the ones who live in Israel, because I really think that this took us back to a dark era. I think we are hearing things and seeing things we thought we'll never see. And I think I would say, if I'll put it for a moment in political terms, I think that many right-wing Jews have to waken up for a kind of forgiving approach they had to the Putins of this world, not seeing how right-wing forces, extreme right-wing forces that were like comfortable for Israel, but when the moment of truth comes, their anti-Semitic evil shows. And I think many people on the left are waking up now to see how, look, what's happening, the fact that only yesterday, I think, or the day before yesterday, the UN Women's Organizations was willing to address the terrible rapes that happened on October 7th and afterwards, 2 months, just because these women were Jewish. So this is a horrible wake-up call for liberals and progressives to see that, they cared so much. We cared so much about other minorities, about human rights. And now we see the hypocrisy on both sides. The extreme right that seemed to play pro-Israel when it really comes to it is totally anti-Semitic. And sadly, the extreme left is extremely anti-Semitic as well. So we are facing here something that is really vicious. And again, I think that it's essential. Again, it's the centrist in me says it's essential for Israel, and it's essential for the Jewish people and the people who care about us to go back. We need, ironically, in a beautiful way, there is harmony between the interests of the Jewish people and the interests of the world. We need stability. We need democracy. We need liberal democracy to work. Because the moment it becomes vicious, unstable, revolutionary, radical, then we are the first ones to be hit by that, but the fire of these dragons. So I'm sorry that right now I have no suggestions. We can discuss it later, but this is, again, what happens in these 2 months, that it began as an assault on Israel. Now it's, and the free world, but now it's a clear assault on all Jews throughout the world. And sadly, we have to acknowledge that. You know, when the opening pages of my book, My Promised Land, I wrote about my great-grandfather. And I wrote that, he left his comfortable life in London. He was a very successful lawyer there, to go to remote Palestine, land of Israel, to go to the Jaffa port. And it seems like a crazy journey. But it was not crazy for two reasons. Because what he and his fellow fathers and mothers of Zionism realized, that the Jews face two horrible problems. One is anti-Semitism. They did not know there will be Auschwitz, but they realized that Europe, Christian Europe, was becoming a death trap to its Jews. And they realized that in order to save the Jewish people, they have to move them from one continent to another. And sadly, after a pause of 70, 80 years, this is true again. I don't believe, I hope we will not see anything like what we've seen in the past, but the kind of hate for the Jews throughout the world now proves there is an existential need to have a Jewish homeland just to save Jewish life. But there was another reason for his journey, which is relevant. And that is that ultra-Orthodox Jews can survive well in New York, in Antwerp, in London, in Manchester, because they live in a ghetto. But the culture, the Jewish secular or Jewish non-Orthodox culture of Freud and Kafka and Einstein and Spielberg and Leonard Bernstein, that culture cannot survive if there isn't a hub, if there isn't a powerhouse of non-religious, non-Orthodox Jewish identity. So for two reasons, because of the hate and because of our internal needs, we need a Jewish home that will be served not only its residents and citizens, but will serve any Jew throughout the world. And again, ironically, it's non-Orthodox Jews who need it much more. Now, there's probably most of you know about birthright. You need that country that the youngsters from Los Angeles and Philadelphia will be able to go, that their buses will go in order to build their Jewish identity. You need it. So Israel is essential. The claim and all this colonialism talk is, I know where it comes from before the hate, but it's ridiculous in the sense that it's exactly the opposite. We were not sent by some mothership to conquer a land that is not ours. We went back to our ancient homeland because that Europe that was colonialist and imperialist was going to kill us. We are the victims of white Europe. We were not sent by white Europe. So these arrogant people in some, hope no offense, in your universities that went crazy. They went crazy. Again, there are so many things that you can criticize Israel. Israel was wrong on so many issues. Talk about occupation, fight about settlements, talk about Netanyahu, talk about this, talk about that. But when there was the Algeria war, the international left was all against French policy. But no one said for a moment that France is illegitimate. No one says we must dismantle Paris. So this crazy, there's no other word. This is not a legitimate intellectual discourse. This is a combination of total ignorance with anti-Semitism, with a simplistic, outrageous approach that doesn't begin to get the reality of this country. So sorry for my emotion, but if I have to say it in a clear way, why Israel? One, because like any other people, we have the right of self-determination. And if you deny the Jews the right of self-determination, you're anti-Semitic. Two, because the Jewish people have contributed so much to humanity and was treated so badly by humanity over the years. So definitely, if you want a kind of historical affirmative action, the historical justice is with us. And third is just what I just said. The Jews were the ultimate victims of the 20th century or 20th century Europe. So I think that even the people who speak in the name of victim, well, that's not my world. They have to understand the fact that this attempt to ignore history, ignore context, and treat us in this unfair and vicious way it's as bad as any kind of racism. The people who speak to right now the river to the sea is now we've seen they want October 7th throughout the country. They want us gone. My dear friend, the late Amos Oz, had this story about an older European Jew who said, in 1935, I opened my window in mid-Europe, in Vienna, and it said, Jew, go to Palestine. I came back in 1970 or 1975, and I opened the window, and it says, Jew, get out of Palestine. That means I have no place. They don't want me anywhere. So that's the river, the real claim of the river to the sea of the people who initiated. They don't want the Jews alive. They don't want the Jews to live anywhere. And they performed it on October 7th. Whoever did not get what we're talking about, the river to the sea means October 7th throughout this country. It's definitely murdering me and my wife and my two boys and my daughter. Definitely. So it has to be clear that anyone who uses this now in this context, in this Hamas-initiated and Qatar-sponsored campaign, this is the meaning of it. Years ago, in my lectures, I used to say that the only problem with a two-state solution concept is the fact there is no solution. I think that, so let me begin elsewhere. I think that we must prevent the one-state catastrophe. But if you want the more civilized approach that used to be the people who used to say, why can't the Jews and the Arabs and the Palestinians live in one country together, in one democratic secular state? The answer is that we tried the one-state solution in Syria, and we saw what happened. And we tried the one-state solution in Lebanon, and we saw what happened. So the only way to have Palestinians and Israelis living a reasonable life, eventually in peace, but some sort of coexistence, is some sort of division. I call it the division of the land, if you don't like the idea of two states, and to give the Palestinians as much rights and liberty and prosperity as possible, as long as it doesn't endanger Israel's very existence, Israeli lives. That's the balance. So my approach has been for years that we should take the two-state concept as a vision, but understand it cannot be implemented immediately. And rather than get on a Harley Davidson and rush to the summit like Ehud Barak did in 2000 and Ehud Olmert did in 2007 and fall to the abyss, get on a pair of bicycles and ride slowly but surely in the right direction. That means create as much autonomous Palestinian spaces as possible, give the Palestinians as much economic growth, political rights as possible. But in the first stages, keep Israeli security, because we see what happens when there is no Israeli security. And then, now, if we specifically talk for a moment about Gaza, what's the future for Gaza? So on the one hand, you have those extreme right-wing Israelis who said, we'll control it, whatever. On the other hand, you have the people who say, give it to the PA. The PA is dysfunctional and corrupt. There is no way they can rule Gaza. So I think the only realistic solution is to turn Gaza into the new Emirates. To us, the Saudis and the Emirates, I prefer the Emirates, to lead the Marshall Plan to rebuild Gaza. Now, why are they such the best players to do it? Because they are not Europeans, they're not Americans, they're not Israelis, they are fellow Arabs. They have the resources and they have the expertise. Their expertise is how to advance moderate Islam. Gaza will not be Denmark in the coming years, and it will not be New Zealand. So the best hope for Gaza is something that resembles the Emirates, that tries to be the Emirates. So in my mind, that's the realistic approach, that Israel, that after we defeat Hamas, there is some sort of international consortium led by the moderate Arabs who now understand how dangerous Hamas is for themselves. So you need an American, Arab, Israeli alliance with, and then I would have moderate Palestinians running it, but I wouldn't take the PA as it is, because it's too corrupt and weak to deal with such an enormous mission. And after we do that, we have to work, or simultaneously, on the West Bank. In my world, I would limit settlement building. I will give the Palestinians as much space. I will bring Arab money for a huge development, so they'll have much more freedom, more than in any other Arab country, but keep Israeli military control for the foreseeable future, because we know what happens if we don't. When I said it's a make or break moment, I think there obviously what the challenges are. I'll say a bit something about them, but there is a great opportunity here, and we have to see that we create a kind of post-war boom and not post-war doom. Netanyahu's formula, he wrote about it in his autobiography, was what he called the Iron Triangle, which is a strong economy supporting a strong military, creating political power, putting Israel on the international map. And it seemed to work. Now we know that of the three, only the economy part worked, okay? Because the military was not strong enough. It was strong, but not as strong as we thought, and we have to make it much stronger now. And politically, we have a problem. Not Jerusalem, we have a problem. But I said at the time when he wrote it, before the war, that what Netanyahu missed is the three terrible things that happened under his rule, which is the state became dysfunctional, society was torn apart, and we lost our neshama. We lost our ethos, the divide and rule politics divided the country, and even the Netanyahu supporters they were not happy. People were like bitter. There was poison in the air. So the mission now is to rebuild the state. It's essential because we cannot survive here without a functioning state. So you don't want like a big government that is inefficient and socialist the old way that we had it years ago. But we will find, I talked before, the Singapore model, the Danish model, whatever model of a functioning, non-corrupt, but effective government. We cannot, look, I won't get into American politics, but as a frontier democracy, you cannot survive if your government doesn't work. So we'll need political reform, revolution of the civil service. We'll have to change all that dramatically. We'll have to unite society, and there is a great opportunity here because of the wartime solidarity. We have not to lose it when the war ends. We have to integrate the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab minorities. And again, there's good news with both these minorities during the war. We have to integrate them. And we have to deal with the Palestinian issue. So in a sentence, going back to what I said before, the problem was that the Palestinian issue became the elephant in the room. For the right-wing blindness was not to see that there are millions of people who are there and we ignore them. And the left-wing people were blind to see Palestinian radicalism and the evil of Hamas. So now, after we've seen it, we must find, again, rebuild the nation, the state, unite society, and deal with the elephant in the room, in the way that I suggested, and just as important, rebuild the alliance with the free world and rebuild the alliance with the Jewish world. It is outrageous that, as I said, non-Orthodox Jews in America or Britain or Australia or wherever, they need Israel more than any other Jews. In order to keep your children, your grandchildren Jewish, you need an Israel that is a beacon, that is a lighthouse. And what extreme right-wing government with the ultra-Orthodox politics of this country and the issues with the Palestinians, what they did is systematically drive away young Jews from Judaism. That was a crime. I talked about it. I said all I could for 20 years. Now, with where I began, when we see that the Jewish state is under attack and the Jewish people are under attack, the need to have a functioning, lively, meaningful alliance between the two is essential. So that all these are, in my mind, the four missions, and I'm doing my best in all kinds of. I'm doing my work to contribute that. I've begun my work not only helping with the war, but to bring ideas for the day after the war, for the post-war Israel, and building the state, uniting society, alliance with the free world, alliance with the Jewish world, is at the heart of that agenda. So people are rattled by that, and I must say that this is look, the anti-Netanyahu crowd has a lot of reasons to be anti-Netanyahu, but it makes its life a bit too easy, because definitely Netanyahu is responsible for the failure of the country, the fact that the country failed in such a way over the last decade, and the myth that he created is gone. But if it was only him, it would have been very simple. It'll be gone and everything will be solved. What you saw here is a profound failure, So you had the intelligence failure, you had an operative failure, you had a political failure, and as I said, now there's a diplomatic failure. And I think I talked about it before, but I'll say it again because I think it's important. I think Israel in the 21st century became a victim of its success. You talk about the genius of Israel. Startup nation was a problem, not, God forbid, the book or the writers. I respect them and love their book. But having high tech is nice, is essential. It's a lot of the success story. But we became addicted to the technological, economical success story. And we thought it solves all problems. And we abandoned the fundamental basic values of Zionism. So we retreated from the army. The best and brightest did not go to the army. We retreated from addressing the conflict, the frontiers. We really, we lived, the Israeli elites lived with their face to Manhattan, some to the Upper East Side and some to the Upper West Side and some loved downtown. Now, sadly, Manhattan has to be part of our life, but we forgot where we live. And we forgot the historical condition that we are locked in. And so the failure, again, Netanyahu is responsible, sure. And there are many details. But what the intelligence failures tells us, that the good people in the Israeli intelligence did not want, they were really like the captain of the Titanic, who says, don't bother me with that iceberg talk. No, everything is fine. We have an amazing ship. The sea is quiet, and don't interrupt it. And I want to send these telegrams, the Marconi telegrams. Don't bring me bad news about icebergs. So it's, yes, Netanyahu is a problem. Netanyahu must go, but it's much deeper than Netanyahu. And this is why the challenge for the day after, look, again, with the work I'm doing now, I'm looking for historical examples, and I'll give one that perhaps those of you who are Democrats will like, and the one that those who are Republicans would like. I really think about Roosevelt's New Deal, how he planned it, and how whatever they did in the first 100 days, and in a different way of Reagan's thinking, which, and I'm not getting, I have my own views, and I'm on the Roosevelt side, but you will need to rebuild Israel. We will need to emerge out of this with the second Israeli Republic, because it's not only Netanyahu, and it's not this specific failure and another failure. It's a profound, and you know how much I love Israel, how much I committed to Israel, but we lost our way, and this is an amazing wake up call, and now it's, again, being an optimist and seeing all this amazing positive energy around in the most difficult time. I'm hopeful that we'll take this crisis, turn it into an amazing opportunity, and rebuild the country. Look, the polls as they are now show that Benny Gantz has 36 seats, 42 seats, which is, again, in Israeli terms, it's almost like an American landslide. Okay, so actually, if he holds, his party, which is a centrist party that now attracts a lot of moderate right voters, a lot of the Likud people see Benny Gantz as Netanyahu's successor. So if that party can, even as the polls are right now, if there were elections right now, you will have a potential coalition of 70 seats of the 120 members of the Knesset. That is a potentially centrist coalition. Now, I know the Benny Gantz plan, which is to have Likud part of it. Now, he wants the right in, and he will want some of the moderate religious parties in, not the extremists, and he will want the moderate left in. So already now you see the potential. I'll tell you where the challenge is in a second. The other development that I see, and here there is a question mark. I think that Naftali Bennett has a good chance of he's like of a kind of comeback and getting a lot of the moderate right-wing voters. So potentially a Gantz-Bennett coalition, I think, will be trying to do things that we've discussed. So the issue here is really to make sure, one that this holds, that there isn't, again, I'm worried about the possibility of an extreme right-wing populist surge. If the war ends badly, God forbid, I think there will be so much anger and frustration that can bring a post-Netanyahu right, extreme right, that is dangerous. But in many ways, Naftali Bennett may give an answer to that, because he can be a kind of dam stopping that potential wave. So again, I like Lapid as well, and I like the Likudniks, and I'm not against anyone. But if you talk right now in a realistic term, a kind of Gantz, Lapid, Bennett government really has a chance. So the issue is a different one. The issue, in my mind, is to see that the potential healers of Israel have the agenda, have the ideas, and have the team. And sadly, the problem we had in Israeli politics in recent years is not only what happened in the Likud, which is terrible deterioration from an impressive party to a party that has really, it has some respectable people at the top, but has really many people who are unworthy. But even in the centrist parties, you didn't have talent. You didn't have amazing talent, and you didn't have profound ideas. This is why I referred to Roosevelt and Reagan. So building the ideas, building the agenda, analyzing in an accurate and even cruel way what the challenges are is essential. The, so to speak, think tank work is crucial, because if we will come with some shallow ideas and superficial remedies, that won't be good enough. That won't be good enough. So I actually think that if, and that's again, not that I'm like the solution, but that's my mission now. And but there are other people. It's not about only myself, but the mission is to give the center and moderate right people who would probably lead the next government, to give them the tools, the concepts, the ideas, the plans, and to use the opportunity of bringing the best and brightest back to politics. And again, one of the problems that are exposed, that we turned our back on politics, and we now have to take a lot of talent back from startup nation, from the high tech, from business, to bring the best people possible to politics, to government, to the civil service, in order to enable the emergence of this second Israeli Republic. I think China is like not torn, but it's ambivalent between, on the one hand, again, because it's kind of supportive of Russia and Iran, so that's a reason to be concerned. I think that on the other hand, there is good reason to think that China doesn't want a regional war. Just think of the price of oil. Russia and China have conflicting interests. Russia would love turmoil that will make it will give it a lot of income, because of the oil prices will rise. China is exactly the opposite. So I can see a scenario where China can actually be constructive for us, but we have to be very cautious and suspicious, because they are strategically in bed with the Russians and the Iranians, and there is this major Chinese-Iranian deal, which is very troubling. So we have to be cautious, even suspicious, but I think there can be good news there as well when it'll come to to try to limit the conflict and to end. So it's the Abraham Accords and it's Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is really the good news, because although they have to, denounce Israel because of internal politics, this relationship is holding very, very nicely. It's a bit more problematic with Jordan, which is weaker, and Egypt, which is weaker. But actually, the Gulf countries, not the non-Qatar Gulf countries, and Saudi Arabia, that's real reason for hope. This erupted because of the radical ascent, because they had so much more capabilities, because they saw an opportunity, because of the Israeli political crisis, and they were threatened by the Saudi-Israeli peace. I think that when the war ends, we have to go back exactly to where we were. I think it will be possible, and it will be essential to have a Saudi-Israeli peace deal. I think that within that, we'll as I said, the Saudis and the Emirates and the others will have a role in leading the Palestinians to a reasonable future. If you want, in a sentence, the future for Gaza is a combination of 1945 Japan with Saudi Arabia of 2030. We want a Gaza 2030, which is denazification of Gaza, the liberation of the people of Gaza from Hamas, and some sort of moderate Arabic Islamic rule that brings progress, bring prosperity and moderation. And I think that the fact that behind the scenes, the Arab-Israeli alliance, the Arabs like us much more than they like us in Berkeley and some parts of Harvard right now. So, and it's because they are realistic. They know where we live, and we know that we are a constructive force. So, to wrap it all up, as the war ends, we will have to deal with the Palestinian issue in a realistic way, to have a regional peace, led, American, Arab, Israeli peace, and rebuild Israel and make it the amazing nation it can and must be.